The late autumn sun was already setting as the young basketball player stepped out of the school gym, adjusting her backpack over her team jersey. She had stayed behind to practice her three-pointers, something she did every Tuesday and Thursday. The familiar route home suddenly felt different today. The streets were quieter than usual, with most kids already home for dinner. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, making her pull her team jacket closer. She could smell someone grilling burgers nearby, reminding her that she needed to get home for her own dinner. Her mom had promised to make her favorite sweet potato casserole tonight. As she walked past the old corner store where she usually bought her post-practice snacks, something caught her attention. A dark blue sedan had passed by twice already. At first, she thought she was just being paranoid. After all, lots of cars looked similar. But then she noticed how it slowed down each time it drove past her. Her heart started beating a little faster, but she remembered what her basketball coach always said about staying calm under pressure. She kept walking at the same pace, not too fast, not too slow. The neighborhood looked different now. The familiar houses with their autumn decorations and the usual parked cars suddenly felt like they were too far away to help. She thought about calling her mom but didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. Besides, her mom was probably still stuck in traffic coming home from the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Her dad was away on a business trip and her older brother was at college. The weight of being alone hit her harder than any full-court press she'd faced on the basketball court. The sedan appeared again, this time moving even slower. She could make out two figures inside, but the tinted windows made it impossible to see their faces clearly. The car's engine had a distinct rumble, not too loud, but noticeable enough to make her stomach tighten every time she heard it approaching. She remembered the safety assembly they had at school last month. The police officer who spoke had emphasized trusting your instincts. Right now, every instinct was telling her something wasn't right. The street lights were starting to flicker on, creating pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. She noticed how her shadow stretched and shrank as she walked from one light to the next. The corner ahead would normally be her turn toward home, but she knew better than to let these people know where she lived. Instead, she kept walking straight toward Main Street where the coffee shop and grocery store meant more people and better lighting. Her phone felt heavy in her jacket pocket, a lifeline waiting to be used. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears now, but years of playing competitive sports had taught her how to keep her composure under stress. She walked past the Thompsons' house, where their golden retriever usually barked at passers-by, but even Max was quiet today. The silence made everything feel more intense. The car appeared again, and this time she noticed something else. They had changed their license plate. She remembered seeing a different number earlier. That detail made her blood run cold. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. This was real. They were actually following her, and they were smart about it. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers wrapping around her phone. She didn't pull it out yet. That might alert them that she was onto their game. Instead, she kept walking, her mind racing through her options. The busy Main Street was still 2 blocks away. 2 blocks had never felt so far before. The growing darkness made the streets feel like a different world. The familiar route she'd walked hundreds of times now felt like unknown territory. But she wasn't going to let fear take over. She was a point guard on her basketball team. She was used to staying cool under pressure and making quick decisions. Right now, she needed to make the most important decision of her life. Time seemed to slow down as she reached for her phone, remembering all those family dinner conversations about staying safe. Her mom's voice echoed in her head. "Baby, there's no shame in asking for help when you need it." Her dad had always added, "Better safe than sorry." Those words had seemed so simple then, but now they carried the weight of the world. She kept walking, her basketball shoes making soft sounds against the sidewalk. The phone felt slick in her sweaty palm as she pulled it out, pretending to check her messages. Years of texting while walking came in handy now. She could type without looking down. Her fingers found the emergency dial pad, muscle memory taking over as she pressed 911. The call connected almost immediately. A calm voice answered, 911, what's your emergency? She kept her voice low but clear, just like when she called plays on the basketball court. I'm walking home from basketball practice, and there's a car following me. They've passed by multiple times and changed their license plate. Her heart was pounding, but she remembered to give the dispatcher her location. I'm on Oak Street, walking toward Main Street. Dark blue sedan, tinted windows. The dispatcher's voice remained steady, becoming an anchor in the chaos. You're doing great, honey. Stay on the line with me. Can you tell me what you're wearing? She described her basketball team jacket and black athletic pants, all while maintaining her pace. The sedan appeared again, moving like a shark circling its prey. This time she noticed more details: a dent in the rear bumper, a missing hubcap on the front right wheel. Each detail she whispered into the phone felt like another lifeline. The dispatcher asked her to head toward a public place, but not to make any obvious changes to her behavior. That was good. She was already walking toward Main Street. Her legs wanted to run, every muscle tensed and ready to sprint, but she forced herself to maintain an even pace. Running would tell them she knew. Running would make them act. A group of middle school kids passed on bikes, their laughter cutting through the tension for a brief moment. She wanted to call out to them, but the dispatcher advised against it. Help is already on the way, the calm voice assured her. You're doing everything right, just keep walking normally. The sun had almost completely set now, but the streetlights provided islands of visibility. She stayed in their glow as much as possible. The sedan drove past again, slower this time. She could feel their eyes on her, making her skin crawl. But she kept her head high, phone pressed to her ear, trying to look like just another teenager on a routine call. Her mind raced through self-defense classes from summer camp. Keys between fingers? No, that was a myth. Make noise? Not yet. Run in the opposite direction of travel, only as a last resort. Right now, her best defense was staying calm and keeping the dispatcher on the line. Each step brought her closer to Main Street, closer to safety. The dispatcher's voice remained her constant companion. There's a patrol car less than 2 minutes away. You're not alone. Those words nearly brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them back. She needed to stay alert, aware of her surroundings. The basketball court had taught her that tunnel vision could cost you the game, or in this case, much more. She passed the old movie theater, closed for renovations. Its dark windows reflected the street behind her, and she caught a glimpse of the sedan turning around again. They were getting bolder, or maybe more desperate. The dispatcher seemed to sense the change in her breathing. Are they getting closer? Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They're turning around again. Dark blue sedan, 2 people inside. She remembered her brother's advice about memorizing details. It had been about remembering plays, but it worked for this too. Every detail she could provide helped. Main Street was just ahead, its traffic lights and store signs promising safety in their glow. But would she make it there before the sedan made another pass? The dispatcher's voice cut through her fears. Stay on the line. Officer Rodriguez is almost there. You're doing great, sweetheart. Just keep walking. She could hear distant sirens now, but they weren't close enough. The sedan was approaching again, slower than ever. This time, she heard the electric whir of a window rolling down. Her throat tightened, but she kept moving, phone pressed to her ear like a shield. The next few moments would change everything. She just didn't know how yet. Officer Rodriguez was finishing her paperwork at the precinct when the call came in. 15 years on the force had taught her that some calls hit differently than others. This was one of them. A young girl, alone, being followed. It grabbed her heart and squeezed. The moment the dispatcher's voice crackled through her radio, she was already moving. The steering wheel felt familiar under her hands as she pulled out of the station, lights off but engine humming with urgency. She knew these streets like the back of her hand, every shortcut, every alley, every trouble spot. Tonight, that knowledge might make all the difference. Just last week, she'd given a safety presentation at the local high school. She'd looked into those young faces, seen their mix of boredom and interest, hoping they'd remember what to do if they ever needed help. Now, one of them was putting those lessons into practice, doing everything right. She wasn't going to let that brave young girl down. The radio chatter continued in her ear as she navigated the early evening traffic. The dispatcher was good, keeping the girl calm, getting vital information. Dark blue sedan, changed plates, 2 suspects. Each detail painted a clearer picture, and none of it was good. These weren't opportunistic troublemakers. This was organized, planned. Her mind flashed to the community meeting she'd attended last month. Parents worried about their kids' safety, especially their daughters. She'd promised them the police department was there to help, that they could trust her. That promise echoed in her head as she took a sharp turn onto Cedar Avenue, the fastest route to Oak Street. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows between the streetlights. Perfect conditions for predators, terrible for their prey. But Officer Rodriguez had an advantage. She knew exactly where the girl was heading, and exactly how to intercept that sedan without spooking them into doing something desperate. She clicked her radio, voice low and steady. "Dispatch, I'm approaching from the south. Get me backup coming in from the east, silent approach. We don't want to scatter them." Years of experience had taught her that the wrong approach could make a bad situation worse. These suspects had already shown they were organized. Startling them might make them dangerous. Her fingers drummed once on the steering wheel as she thought through her options. Direct confrontation could put the girl at risk. Too subtle, and the suspects might slip away. She needed the perfect balance, like threading a needle in the dark. The weight of her badge felt heavy against her chest, a reminder of her responsibility, her promise to protect. The dispatcher's voice came through again, window rolling down on the suspect vehicle. Time was running out. Officer Rodriguez pressed the accelerator, police training warring with her instinct to rush in with lights and sirens blaring. "Almost there, baby girl," she whispered, though the teen couldn't hear her. "Just hold on." She could see Main Street's lights ahead, a beacon in the growing darkness. Her training kicked in automatically, scanning for escape routes, checking for civilians, planning her approach. The girl had mentioned a basketball jacket. That detail stuck in Officer Rodriguez's mind, reminding her of her own daughter at that age. Personal, but not too personal, just enough to fuel her focus. The radio crackled again. Backup was in position, waiting for her signal. They'd worked together long enough to know each other's moves, to trust each other's instincts. Tonight, that trust would need to be perfect. One wrong move could turn this into a tragedy. She spotted the dark blue sedan ahead, moving slowly along Oak Street. Her trained eye caught the details, the missing hubcap, the dent, the tinted windows that were just a shade too dark to be legal. More importantly, she saw the young girl, phone still pressed to her ear, walking steady despite her fear. That composure, that courage, deserved nothing less than her absolute best. Officer Rodriguez took a deep breath, hands steady on the wheel. 15 years of training, community meetings, school presentations, and street experience had prepared her for this moment. She wasn't just a police officer right now, she was every parent's promise of protection, every child's hope for safety, every community's need for justice. The next few moments would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and the kind of instincts that only came from years of serving and protecting her community. As she positioned her patrol car, she sent up a silent prayer. Not for herself, but for the brave young girl who had trusted the system, trusted her to keep her safe. That trust would not be misplaced. Not tonight. Not on her watch. The sound of the car window rolling down sent chills through her entire body. She gripped her phone tighter, the dispatcher's voice a lifeline in her ear. The sedan was crawling alongside her now, close enough that she could smell exhaust fumes mixing with the crisp autumn air. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced them to keep moving at the same steady pace. "Hey there," a voice called from the car, trying to sound friendly. "Looks like it's getting dark. Need a ride?" The words seemed to float in the air between them, heavy with hidden meaning. She kept her eyes forward, pretending not to hear. Her coach's voice echoed in her head. "Stay focused, stay calm, trust your training." Right now, those basketball lessons felt more important than ever. The dispatcher's voice was steady in her ear. "Don't respond to them. Keep walking. Help is seconds away." She could feel sweat running down her back despite the cool evening air. The streetlights cast strange shadows, making everything feel surreal, like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. A second voice from the car, deeper than the first. "Come on, we're just trying to help. It's not safe for a young girl to be out alone." The irony of those words might have made her laugh if she wasn't so terrified. Her whole body was on high alert, every sense heightened. She could hear the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant sound of traffic on Main Street, the low rumble of the sedan's engine. The basketball in her backpack bumped against her spine with each step, its familiar weight somehow comforting. She'd faced tough opponents on the court, but nothing like this. Still, those years of training under pressure were paying off. Her breathing remained steady, her steps even. Don't show fear. Don't show weakness. The car edged closer to the curb. Too close. She could see the passenger's hand resting on the door handle. Her muscles tensed, ready to run, but the dispatcher's words held her back. Don't run unless you absolutely have to. Stay in public view. Officer Rodriguez is almost there. The name felt like a shield, something solid to hold onto in this nightmare. Time seemed to stretch like taffy. Each step forward felt like walking through deep water. The sedan's headlights cast her shadow long and dark against the nearby fences. In that stretched-out shadow, she looked taller, stronger. Maybe she was. She thought of her little sister at home, probably working on homework, not knowing her big sister was living through this moment. The thought made her stand a little straighter. Another voice from the car, more insistent now. Hey, we're talking to you. The friendly pretense was slipping, revealing something uglier underneath. She could hear the threat in those words, feel the danger in their impatience. But she also heard something else. Uncertainty. They hadn't expected her to be so composed, so resistant to their practiced tactics. The dispatcher's voice cut through her thoughts. Officer Rodriguez has visual contact. Don't react. Keep walking normally. Hope surged through her chest, but she kept her face neutral. Don't let them know. Don't give away the approaching rescue. Her legs trembled with the effort of maintaining her steady pace. She could see Main Street now, its traffic lights changing from green to yellow to red, marking the seconds. The coffee shop's neon sign glowed like a beacon, just a little further. The car's engine revved slightly. Frustration or preparation? She didn't want to find out. The handle of her phone was slick with sweat, but she held on tight, the dispatcher's calm voice keeping her grounded. A memory flashed through her mind. Last summer's championship game, down by 2 points, 5 seconds on the clock. The pressure had been intense then, but she'd stayed focused, made the shot. This was different, the stakes impossibly higher, but that same steel core within her held strong. One step at a time. Keep moving forward. The passenger leaned out the window slightly, starting to say something else, when a new sound cut through the evening air, the distinctive rumble of a police engine, still out of sight but growing closer. The men in the car noticed too. She could feel their attention shift, the energy changing from predatory to uncertain. The car's engine revved again, but they didn't speed away, not yet. They were calculating, deciding. These final moments were the most dangerous. She knew it. The dispatcher knew it. You're doing great, honey. Almost there. Don't change anything. The words barely registered through the roaring in her ears. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but she maintained her pace. The game wasn't over until it was over, and right now, she needed to keep playing it smart. Officer Rodriguez turned onto Oak Street with the precision of a surgeon, her patrol car gliding silently into position. 15 years of experience had taught her exactly how to approach, not too fast to spook the suspects, not too slow to risk the girl's safety. The streetlights cast alternating patterns of light and shadow across her windshield as she closed the distance. Through her windshield, she could see the whole scene unfolding like a tense play. The young girl in her basketball jacket walking steadily, phone still pressed to her ear, and the dark blue sedan crawling alongside her like a predator. The girl's composure struck Officer Rodriguez. In 15 years, she'd rarely seen such controlled courage from someone so young. The radio crackled softly with confirmation that backup units were in position, hidden on side streets, ready to move. Officer Rodriguez's hands were steady on the wheel as she accelerated slightly, closing the gap. Years of training kicked in automatically. Check crossroads, note civilian positions, identify escape routes. Every detail mattered in these crucial moments. She could see the exact moment the suspects noticed her patrol car in their rearview mirror. The sedan's brake lights flickered briefly, hesitation. That split second told her everything she needed to know. These weren't just opportunistic criminals, they were experienced enough to recognize police tactics. That made them more dangerous, but also more predictable. In one smooth motion, Officer Rodriguez switched on her patrol car's lights. No siren, just the silent flash of red and blue painting the street in emergency colors. The effect was immediate. The sedan's engine revved as the driver prepared to flee, but Officer Rodriguez was already executing her plan. She pulled alongside the sedan, boxing it against the curb while leaving enough space for safety. The young girl, showing remarkable awareness, stepped away from the curb onto the nearby lawn, still keeping her phone pressed to her ear. The dispatcher's voice in Officer Rodriguez's radio confirmed what she could see. The girl was clear of immediate danger. Now came the tricky part. 2 backup units appeared at both ends of the street, their arrival timed perfectly. Officer Rodriguez had positioned her car at precisely the right angle. The sedan couldn't reverse without hitting her, couldn't go forward without meeting the backup unit, and the curb blocked their escape to the right. The trap was sprung with the precision of a well-practiced play. Police, turn off your engine and keep your hands where I can see them. Officer Rodriguez's voice carried the authority of 15 years on the force. She watched through her window as both suspects raised their hands, their body language shifting from predatory confidence to sudden uncertainty. The driver's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. Time seemed to move in slow motion as Officer Rodriguez opened her car door, years of training guiding every movement. Her backup was approaching on foot now, weapons ready but not drawn. The street had gone eerily quiet, the only sound the idle of engines and the distant hum of Main Street traffic. The young girl had backed away to a safe distance, but Officer Rodriguez could see she was still standing tall, still keeping her composure. That kind of courage deserved to see justice done right. Officer Rodriguez approached the sedan with measured steps, every sense alert for sudden movements. The passenger window was still down from when they'd been talking to the girl. Driver, turn off the engine and drop the keys out the window. Her voice was calm but left no room for argument. The driver complied, the keys landing on the pavement with a metallic clink. Through the window, Officer Rodriguez could see what the girl had described, new license plates poorly attached, covering what were likely the real ones underneath. Evidence for later. The backup officers moved in perfect coordination, taking up positions around the vehicle. This was the moment where things could go wrong, where suspects sometimes made desperate choices. But Officer Rodriguez's positioning had left them no good options, and they knew it. Sometimes the best arrests were the ones where the suspects could see their own defeat. Passenger, slowly open your door with your left hand. Another practiced command, another moment of tension. The door opened with a soft click. The streetlights illuminated the interior of the car, revealing everything they needed to see. Tools of their trade scattered across the back seat, more evidence for the growing case. One of the backup officers moved to secure the young girl, leading her to the safety of a patrol car while the arrests proceeded. Officer Rodriguez could see the girl's shoulders finally relax, the phone lowering from her ear as the dispatcher's job ended and the police's continued. She had done everything right, had shown the kind of clear thinking that turned potential tragedies into arrests. The next few minutes were a well-choreographed dance of procedure, suspects secured, rights read, scene controlled. Officer Rodriguez moved through it all with practiced efficiency, but part of her attention stayed on the young girl, now safe in the backup car. There would be questions, statements, procedures to follow. But the most important part was done. A young life protected, predators caught, community a little safer than it had been 5 minutes ago. The next hour passed in a blur of flashing lights and official procedures. The young basketball player sat in the back of Officer Rodriguez's patrol car, a warm blanket around her shoulders and a cup of hot chocolate from the nearby coffee shop warming her hands. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. Her mom had arrived 10 minutes ago, rushing from the hospital still in her nurse's scrubs. The reunion had been tearful but composed, both mother and daughter trying to be strong for each other. Officer Rodriguez watched them through the patrol car window, giving them space while keeping a protective eye on the scene. She'd seen many cases in her career, but the sight of family reunions never got old. The investigation was moving quickly. The suspect's car had yielded a treasure trove of evidence, fake license plates, maps marked with high school locations, and tools that painted a disturbing picture of their intentions. But more importantly, the girl's quick thinking had given police exactly what they needed: clear descriptions, specific details, and a timeline of events that would make the case rock solid. "You did everything right," Officer Rodriguez said, sitting down next to the girl while her mother spoke with another officer. The details you remembered about the car, the way you stayed calm, heading toward Main Street instead of home, those weren't just smart moves, they were brave ones. The girl nodded, her hands still wrapped around the paper cup, its warmth a comfort against the evening chill. The coffee shop owner had kept his store open past closing time, offering hot drinks to the officers and family. It was the kind of community support that reminded everyone why this neighborhood was special. Through the shop window, they could see him making another round of coffee, refusing payment from the officers on scene. The girls' basketball coach had shown up too, having heard about the incident through the community grapevine. She stood talking with the girl's mother, both of them stealing glances at their brave young player. The coach had brought the girl's gym bag from school, a small gesture that somehow made everything feel a little more normal. Detective Chen arrived on scene, her notebook already out as she approached Officer Rodriguez. The two had worked together for years, building cases that stuck. "We've got priors on both suspects," she said quietly, showing Rodriguez her phone. 3 counties were looking for this car. The description from our young witness matches 2 other reported incidents. The girl watched the officers talking, still processing everything that had happened. Her phone had been buzzing with texts from worried teammates who'd somehow heard the news, but she wasn't ready to respond yet. Right now, she just wanted to sit quietly, surrounded by the protective bubble of police cars and caring adults. Officer Rodriguez turned back to the girl and her mother. "We'll need to take a formal statement, but it can wait until tomorrow. Tonight you should go home, be with family." The mother nodded gratefully, pulling her daughter closer. The girl looked up at Officer Rodriguez, finding her voice. "What will happen to them?" The men in the car. The officer's face softened. "They're going away for a long time. The evidence we found, combined with your detailed account, they won't be able to hurt anyone else." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Your courage today didn't just keep you safe. You helped us stop people who've been terrorizing other communities. That's something to be proud of." The crime scene unit was finishing up, their cameras flashing as they documented everything. The suspects had already been transported to the station, their set and now just evidence in what was becoming a multi-jurisdiction case. Detective Chen was on her phone, coordinating with other departments who'd been looking for these men. The girl's phone buzzed again, this time a message from her older brother at college. Mom must have called him. The simple "love you, sis. Proud of you" brought the first tears she'd allowed herself to shed. Her mother squeezed her shoulder, understanding the release of emotion. Officer Rodriguez watched as more community members gathered at the edges of the scene. Neighbors who'd heard what happened, parents walking over from nearby homes, even the old man who ran the corner store where the girl usually bought her post-practice snacks. They weren't there to gawk, but to show support, to make sure one of their own was okay. The streetlights seemed brighter now, the autumn air less threatening. The girl stood up, blanket still around her shoulders, ready to go home. But before leaving, she turned to Officer Rodriguez. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me, for coming so quickly." The officer smiled, remembering her own words from last week's school presentation. "That's what community means. We look out for each other." 2 weeks after the incident, the high school gym was packed for a special assembly. Students filled the bleachers, their usual chatter replaced by attentive silence as Officer Rodriguez stood at the podium. Behind her sat the brave basketball player who had shown such remarkable courage, now wearing her team jersey with quiet pride. What happened 2 weeks ago wasn't just about one brave student, Officer Rodriguez began, her voice carrying to every corner of the gym. It was about a community coming together, about the power of preparation, and about turning fear into strength. She glanced at the young athlete who sat tall despite all the attention, her teammates flanking her supportively. The local news had picked up the story, not for its sensationalism, but for its lessons in community policing done right. The headline had read, "Quick-thinking teen and rapid police response leads to major arrest." No names were published. The focus was on the partnership between police and community that had made the difference. Since that night, our department has received calls from police chiefs across the state. Officer Rodriguez continued. They want to know about our community outreach programs, our school safety presentations, our response protocols. But what they really need to know is sitting right here in this gym. It's all of you, this community, working together. The young basketball player thought back to that night, how different things felt now. Her team had rallied around her, turning practice sessions into informal safety discussions. The coach had started incorporating situational awareness into their training routines, teaching them to be alert without being afraid. The city council meeting last week had been another turning point. The mayor had presented a community safety initiative inspired by recent events. More lighting was being installed along school routes, emergency call boxes were being updated, and a new community watch program was taking shape. But most importantly, the barriers between police and community were coming down. Today, we're not just talking about what went right that night, Officer Rodriguez said, moving away from the podium to speak more directly to the students. We're here to make sure every single one of you knows what to do, who to call, and that you'll be believed. She gestured to the row of officers along the wall, each one chosen for their commitment to youth outreach. The basketball player's mother sat in the front row, still in her nurse's scrubs. She'd come straight from her shift. Since that night, she'd become an advocate for parent-police cooperation, organizing meetings between officers and local parents. Her hospital had even started hosting safety workshops for staff and patients. Officer Rodriguez introduced a new program, student safety ambassadors who would work with police to improve communication between teens and law enforcement. The brave basketball player had been asked to lead the program, turning her experience into something positive for others. Her first suggestion had already been implemented, a buddy system for student athletes staying late for practice. The assembly shifted into a practical session, with officers demonstrating safety techniques and students practicing emergency calls. The energy in the gym was focused but positive. This wasn't about fear, but empowerment. Even the youngest students were engaged, asking questions and sharing their own experiences. During the break, the basketball player found herself surrounded by younger students, especially girls, asking how she stayed so calm that night. She thought carefully before answering. I remembered what Officer Rodriguez taught us. Trust your instincts, keep thinking clearly, and know that help will come. Her words, simple but powerful, were exactly what they needed to hear. The local coffee shop owner had provided refreshments for the assembly. He'd become something of a community hero himself, turning his shop into an official safe haven for students. Other businesses along Main Street had followed suit, creating a network of safe spaces throughout the neighborhood. As the assembly wound down, Officer Rodriguez shared one final thought. What happened 2 weeks ago could have been tragic. Instead, it became a turning point. One brave student showed us all what community really means, looking out for each other, trusting each other, supporting each other. The basketball player looked around the gym, seeing familiar faces in a new light. Her teammates, her coaches, her teachers, the officers who'd responded that night. They weren't just people she knew anymore. They were her community, her support system, her strength. Later that afternoon, at basketball practice, she noticed new faces in the bleachers, younger students staying to watch, learning from the older players both on and off the court. The team had become more than athletes. They were role models for a new kind of community awareness. As she dribbled the ball down court, she caught sight of Officer Rodriguez talking with her coach by the door. The officer gave her a quick nod, a simple gesture that carried the weight of shared experience and mutual respect. The scary night 2 weeks ago had changed her, but not in the way those men had intended. It had made her and her community stronger.